At my mother-in-law's extravagant birthday dinner in Rome, I arrived expecting nothing more than a polite evening, even though the tension between us had been growing for months. But when I walked into the candlelit courtyard of the historic villa, surrounded by marble columns and guests dressed like royalty, something felt wrong. My eyes scanned the long table draped in gold linen, every seat carefully assigned, place cards handwritten in calligraphy, except mine. My chair was gone. Completely gone. My husband's voice cut through the clinking glasses before I could even speak. "Oops," he chuckled loud enough for the entire table to hear, "looks like we miscounted. Guess you don't need a seat tonight." His mother laughed first, then his sisters, then the cousins, each one looking at me as if this humiliation was a rehearsed performance they had been waiting for. Even the servers paused. For a moment, the world went painfully still. I stood there, holding the small velvet gift box I'd bought for his mother, something she would probably never accept from me anyway, and felt the weight of every insult, every snide comment, every whispered comparison she'd made about the better women her son could have married. My husband didn't even look ashamed. He just leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine like he was enjoying a show. The cold Roman evening breeze brushed against my bare shoulders, but the chill I felt inside was sharper. I could hear a few guests murmur, "How embarrassing," while another said, "Poor thing, she should have known better." They didn't know that this wasn't a mistake, it was a message. One they all expected me to silently swallow. But silence was something I had given this family for far too long. I straightened my posture, forcing the hurt down, letting the humiliation settle just long enough to transform into something steadier, colder, and far more powerful. I set the velvet box gently onto the empty table space where my seat should have been. Then I turned to face my husband fully. He raised an eyebrow at me, smirking like he'd already won. I returned the smile, only mine was calm, collected, and quietly devastating. "Seems I'm not family," I said softly, but my voice carried through the entire courtyard, dropping the temperature of the room instantly. The laughter stopped. A few forks froze midair. My husband's smirk faltered, just slightly, but he covered it with a scoff. I didn't give him a second look. Instead, I lifted my chin, turned, and walked out of the villa with a steady grace none of them expected. They thought they had excluded me. They had no idea I was about to remove myself, and everything they relied on, in ways they never saw coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to support stories of women reclaiming their power. As I stepped out of the villa and into the dimly lit Roman courtyard, the distant sound of music and laughter faded behind me, replaced by the quiet echo of my own heels against the ancient stone path. For the first time in months, maybe years, I finally heard myself think. The humiliation I had endured inside was still lingering in my chest, raw and burning, but beneath that pain something else was rising, something colder, steadier, and far more intentional. I paused beside a carved marble fountain, the water glistening under soft lantern light, and let the weight of the last hour settle into me. They thought they had embarrassed me. They thought they had reminded me of my place. But what they didn't realize was that tonight, they gave me my freedom. I leaned against the stone edge, closing my eyes for a moment as the breeze lifted my hair. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. Not just with the dinner, not just with the insults, but with the entire performance I had been forced to play since the day I married into that family. For years, they had built a quiet narrative around me, that I was lucky to be here, lucky to be chosen, lucky to be tolerated. My husband had repeated that story until even I had started to accept it. But standing there under the Roman night sky, I felt something inside me break in the cleanest, most liberating way imaginable. When I opened my eyes again, the courtyard felt different. Not intimidating. Not cold. Just open. Like a place where a new plan could be written. My phone vibrated inside my purse, a message from my husband. "Stop being dramatic and come back." A second message followed. "You're embarrassing me." I laughed quietly, a soft, humorless sound. The man who humiliated me in front of 20 people was now worried about his own image. Of course he was. That family cared about one thing, control. And it wasn't until I walked away that I realized how much of myself I had surrendered to preserve a peace that never truly existed. I sat on the stone ledge of the fountain and began scrolling through the photos on my phone, not to reminisce, but to remind myself of who I had once been. There were pictures of me before the marriage, traveling alone, smiling without hesitation, standing tall without worrying about who might be judging. The woman I was then was brave, curious, unafraid to walk away from anything that dimmed her shine. Somewhere over the years, I had tried so hard to keep my marriage intact that I had let that version of myself fade. But she was back now. A soft rustle made me look up. One of the villa's servers had stepped outside for a break. He gave me a polite smile, and I realized how long I had been sitting there. "Are you all right, Signora?" he asked gently. I nodded once, then stood with a calmness that surprised even me. "I am," I said quietly. And for the first time in a long time, the words felt true. I wasn't going to return to that table. I wasn't going to pretend nothing had happened. I wasn't even going to confront my husband. No, I was going to let my absence speak louder than anything I could say. And by the time they realized what my silence meant, I would already be 3 steps ahead. I walked through the narrow stone alley beside the villa, the cool night air brushing against my skin as if encouraging me forward. Every step felt strangely grounding, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself with each movement. The music inside grew faint until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the gentle hum of Rome at night. Lanterns glowed softly along the path, their golden halos flickering against old walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets, heartbreaks, betrayals, rebirths. Tonight, they witnessed mine. I paused beneath a climbing vine of white roses tangled around an iron archway. They looked delicate, peaceful, untouched by the pettiness and cruelty I had just walked away from. For a moment, I simply breathed them in, grounding myself in a reality that was finally my own. As I continued walking, a surprising steadiness washed over me. I wasn't confused. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry anymore. Anger was temporary. What I felt now was purpose, a quiet, controlled kind of clarity that could only come after too much had been taken for too long. My husband believed he understood me, believed he had shaped me, tamed me. He never realized that the patience he mistook for submission was simply me watching, learning, preparing. All those subtle manipulations, the patronizing comments, the snide glances from his family, they had taught me exactly who they were. But more importantly, they reminded me exactly who I used to be. When I reached the small courtyard exit, I stopped again and looked back at the villa. Through the windows, I could see their silhouettes, laughter, raised glasses, careless movements of people who had never imagined consequences. I wondered how long it would take for them to realize I had left entirely, and the thought didn't bring guilt. It brought a calm, soft smile. Leaving quietly would unsettle them far more than any dramatic confrontation. Because people who rely on control panic the moment they lose even a fraction of it. I pulled out my phone again, not to read my husband's messages. There were more now, all variations of annoyance and command, but for something far simpler. I opened my banking app and took a long look at the account I had been quietly building for the past 6 months. He didn't know about it. His family didn't know about it. They had assumed I was financially dependent, unaware that I had been channeling every freelance project, every consulting hour, every hidden part of my old life into rebuilding the independence they thought they'd erased. I wasn't just emotionally leaving tonight. I was practically free, too. A taxi slowed near the courtyard entrance, the driver rolling down his window as if he sensed I needed a way out. "Taxi, Signora?" he asked kindly. I studied the glowing city behind him, the winding streets, the quiet promise of distance, the possibility of rewriting everything from this moment onward. "Yes," I said softly, gripping the strap of my purse. "But I need to make one stop first. Not to return. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Just one final step, a silent one, that would end an old chapter cleanly before I began the next. And after tonight, nothing in my life would ever look the same again." The taxi's interior light flickered softly as I slid into the back seat, the worn leather cool beneath my palms. The city outside moved in blurred strokes of gold and silver, reflections dancing across the windows like whispers of the life I was about to claim. I gave the driver the address without hesitation, not the villa, not any place tied to my husband, but the one location that mattered tonight. Via Aurelia, 27, I said, my voice steady, controlled. He nodded and eased the car into the quiet Roman streets. As the vehicle hummed forward, I leaned my head against the window, watching the night expand in front of me, each passing street lamp illuminating the truth I had ignored for far too long. I thought of the girl I had been when I married him, hopeful, trusting, willing to believe kindness could soften arrogance. I thought of how I had molded myself around his world, shrinking every part of me that made him insecure. He had mistaken my silence for weakness, my loyalty for blindness. But tonight, in the stillness of this cab, I realized something important. I had never been weak. I had simply been patient. And patience, when finally exhausted, becomes power in its purest form. A different power than the loud, reckless force my husband used. Mine was quieter, sharper, deliberate. As we drove deeper into the city, I opened my purse and pulled out a small velvet box I had tucked inside earlier. I held it in the center of my palm, letting its weight settle there. Inside the box wasn't jewelry or tokens of affection, nothing sentimental. It held the spare key to our safety deposit box, the one he believed he controlled alone. What he didn't know was that months ago, I had discreetly added my own name to the account. All those times he arrogantly waved the key in front of me while boasting about his financial responsibility, he had no idea I was quietly rewriting the narrative. He had always underestimated me, and that was the most powerful advantage I had. The cab turned down a quieter road lined with tall cypress trees, their shadows crossing over us like long, reaching fingers. My heartbeat steadied with each passing minute, as if syncing with something ancient inside me, the instinct to protect myself, to rebuild myself, to reclaim what had always been mine. When we neared the bank's after-hours entrance, a small light above the door glowed like a beacon. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about taking something from him. It was about securing what I needed before walking away completely. The car rolled to a soft stop. I didn't rush. I inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air settle in my chest as I stepped out. The pavement beneath my heels felt solid, grounding, like the first page of a blank chapter. I approached the security terminal, inserted my access card, and the door clicked open with a quiet finality. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of paper and metal, the scent of records, documents, proof. Proof of what was his. Proof of what was mine. Proof of what would no longer belong to him after tonight. As I walked toward the private vault area, my footsteps echoed softly, steady and unshaken. Whatever waited behind that steel door would determine the exact shape of my freedom. And I wasn't afraid of any of it. Julian didn't step foot into the Silverstone Grill again after that night. Not because he wasn't allowed, but because he couldn't face the version of himself that had been stripped bare in front of everyone. The confidence he wore like a crown had dissolved, replaced by something he'd never felt before, the weight of being seen without the armor of arrogance. He tried returning to the office the next morning, walking through the glass doors like a ghost wearing his own skin. People didn't speak, but silence has never been quiet for a man who once lived on applause. The whispers that slipped through the hallways weren't sharp or mocking, they were worse. They were disappointed. He walked past the conference room where he once dominated every conversation. Now, his name tag had been removed from the table. A new one sat in its place, Chairwoman Evelyn Hart, owner and visionary. He froze when he saw it, realizing that the seat he believed was his birthright had never belonged to him at all. Julian signed the HR exit documents with trembling hands. Not because he feared losing his job, but because he feared facing the one person he had underestimated the most. At home, the house felt different. Not empty, just honest. He found Evelyn in the study, the room he once believed she used only for reading and little hobbies. Now, he finally understood the truth. This room wasn't where she escaped him, it was where she built an empire while he laughed at his own reflection. He stopped at the doorway. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice stripped of pride. She didn't look up immediately. For the first time, she let silence arrive before she did. When she finally raised her eyes, they were calm, not cruel, not vengeful, simply done. "Yes?" she asked softly. He swallowed. His usual excuses, justifications, pretty lies, they didn't come. Humiliation has a way of rinsing out arrogance. I'm sorry," he said. A simple sentence, but it carried years of weight. Evelyn closed her notebook and leaned back. She studied him, not the man he pretended to be, but the man he finally became when the mask fell. "I know you are," she said. "And maybe one day you'll understand why silence is stronger than shouting." His eyes lowered. For the first time, he had nothing to defend. She stood, walked past him, and gently touched his arm, not as a wife comforting her husband, but as a woman releasing someone she had already outgrown. "That night at dinner," she said softly, "you taught me something important." He looked up, hopeful. That arrogance looks powerful, until it meets someone who doesn't need the spotlight to win. He exhaled shakily. "And what did you learn?" he asked. Evelyn gave a faint smile. "That silence isn't surrender. It's strategy." He didn't follow her after that. Instead, he left quietly, like a man finally willing to hear the echo of his own mistakes. That night, Evelyn sat by the window, the same place she once wondered how long she could stay quiet. And now, she smiled. Because silence had carried her further than noise ever could. She lifted her glass, not in revenge, not in triumph, but in peace. Because this was never about breaking him. It was about revealing her. If this story of silent power and calculated grace moved you, take a moment and hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it when Evelyn slid that envelope across the dinner table, or when she whispered the words that ended his illusion, "Relax, dear"? Jokes are fun. Don't miss more stories of strength, silence, and poetic justice. Subscribe and hit the bell, so you're the first to witness the next story that speaks without shouting.